this computer. All right, hello everybody. Welcome back to class. The class that seemingly always starts on Bahamian time, something not a super big fan of. All right, so this week we are doing two things. One, we are going to wrap up our lesson for last week on statistics and measurement. And we are going to start a new chapter, chapter 5, which I previously asked you guys to start reading. We're just going to jump right into it today, getting through objectives 1 through 10. So, what's happening right now? Okay. Okay. But we're going to start off really, really quickly with our discussions, our group discussions from last week. So does any group have all of its members here? What is happening? It's not making me tired in advance. Anyone?
Hey, class.
That's when you choose to get your book.
Not muted right now, whoever that is. Nobody. Does anyone have their class discussion to begin now? Because we can move on from this assignment and just not have grades today at all. Yeah, I'm aware that not everybody's here, but it's like, it's 6:05, 6. Okay, I'm gonna take a beat. Because what is really unacceptable is starting class late because people insist on getting here late. Like that's not gonna work. So we can start as business as usual because there's another assignment for this class. And like that's gonna get done. So whether or not people decide to show up or show up on time, business will get done. So does anybody at all have all of the members of their team yet?
I'm not sure if all of my members are here, but Dr. Turnquest usually started at 6:10 or 6:15 to give a grace period, but I don't think all of my members are here.
Okay, yeah. I mean, there is the concept of like the grace period, but then there's also the concept of like I'd rather start early, end early. And there's just the general respect of like arriving on time.
Yep.
Yeah. It's respectful for the people who have decided to show up when we said we were going to be here. That's, yeah. And we've definitely gone through at least a week now where people have established that my name is not Darren Turnquest. So get into it. I mean, because I could create a strategy for this that is less beneficial to you, but my goal is to give you the best possible opportunity to be successful in class. Why would I not afford you with that? Okay. Does anyone have the you don't have to have your whole team. Can everybody email me their team assignments now, please? You should have my email in your inboxes, but in any event, I emailed you previously. So whoever has your team assignment, if I can get those by 6:10, I'm going to give you until 6:10 to turn those in. So we have about 4 minutes to have them submitted. In 4 minutes, we will begin our group conversations, or I will just grade you based on what you have sent me, and we will just move on with the lesson.
I have a question. I think some of my group members, we were going to like orally present it. So is it possible if we can send you the spreadsheet with the numbers on it? Because we didn't have like a paragraph format. We just have all our numbers in the spreadsheet.
But a paragraph format was what was requested. Because I do get, remember, you are telling a story, and just presenting the spreadsheet, you have increased your chance of having a disjointed story. And I cannot adequately account for what information you do or do not have within there. And that is how your grade will be reflected. So, I mean, in short, what that means is like, if I cannot adequately identify that you've done all the things that I've asked of you because you've decided to not submit the assignment in the format requested, you can literally only hold yourself to account for getting the grade that you get. Yeah, I'm just matching your energy at this point. Anyway, okay, so we have about 2 minutes before we move on, and I give instructions. I'm this second assignment, the learning activity, I don't want to use the term assignment because that sounds scary. The learning activity for today, I have designed as a group assignment, and I've done that literally to, okay, Monet, I've gotten yours. I've done that to kind of like ease your burden so that I find great value in working collaboratively. But barring that, it's not that you won't, you can go. Barring that, it's not that you won't have the assignment to do. It just means you're gonna have to do the learning activity by your individual selves. If we've established that like doing things together is an ineffective strategy, you're just gonna have to do them. I'll just have to have like 22 assignments as opposed to having 4 or 6 of them, which either way is fine with me. But working collaboratively definitely eases the burden of everyone collectively. All right, it is 6:10. I have officially 1 assignment in inbox. Monet, do you want to go ahead and, this is group 3. Do you want to just go ahead and present your groups? Oh, this is quite elaborate. I'm impressed in advance. Okay. So, I mean, you can go ahead and read it, and then we can discuss it.
Denisha could start off.
Okay, no problem.
Good afternoon. So we are group 3. So a survey of 38 parents and guardians of students in the Bahamas was conducted. Since everyone in this targeted area or group had equal opportunity to get a survey and to be a part of this study, the sampling technique applied was random sampling. The data was classified using a nominal scale in which we piece in the data and we suggested, in the piece of data that we were assigned, and it was labeled to identify what was being recorded. This set is called How Are You Connected to the Child or Student? Because it identifies the object, parents or guardians of the students who fall into this group, which includes stepfathers and stepmothers, grandparents, aunts and uncles, and legal guardians. The data was classified also using an ordinal scale, which allows one to evaluate a participant's attitude towards a specific subject by using ordered question. This set called the question was the statement was the school encourages its students to work hard. As the respondents were asked to rank their feelings of a subject from an ordered state and choose if they strongly agree, somewhat agree, strongly disagree, or do not know. For the data set, how many children do you have in your care? The following were collected. The mean was calculated to be 4.5 as 0 to 9 were added together and divided by 10. The median is 4 and 5 because they are the numbers in the middle of the set. The mood is 1 to 3 because the children in this number has the most in this data set, and Monet will finish the rest.
Okay. Okay. We found that the range for the dataset labeled age group is from 18 to 56 plus, seeing that the age starts from 18 and goes to 56 plus, which is not a quantifiable number. The two data sets that are used in the hypothesis are the school encourages its students to work hard, and it provides high quality instruction to my student. When comparing these two data sets, you'll see that the bulk of the responses are the same. The majority of the parents believe that school encourages kids to work hard, and on the other hand, the school produces optimal education to students. We got to the conclusion that these two data sets are related because in order for students to desire to study and work hard, it starts with the foundation, which is in the school, and teachers being able to inspire students to do their best, which results in the excellent quality for the students. Thank you.
Sorry, I was talking and I was obviously muted. All right, good job. Okay, you were able to tell a story. So far, it looks like you have covered all of your bases, and I am incredibly proud of this group. It's a great start to the day. I only have your assignment, so there's that, and we're just gonna jump into the rest of today's class. All right, gonna share my screen right now. Share screen. Okay, so like I said, last week, you guys were advised to read up on this chapter, and it is on learning. It's a very, very valuable chapter, particularly if you are not only in education, but if you're also in any type of leadership, because we're going to be talking mostly about classical conditioning and operant conditioning. And these are strategies that are used universally, and often we use them. We have different types of conditioning that occurs, and sometimes it is unintentional. So we're going to be actively thinking about, the context of conditioning, sometimes when it is active, looking at classical conditioning and looking at operant conditioning. And classical conditioning is literally, it's a concept where we train a behavior to respond to a certain stimulus. And you guys may have heard of the incident of like Pavlov's dog. We're going to go through that today. And then operant conditioning has a lot to do with how we have designed our rewards and punishment systems in both schools and in society in general. So like I said, these two strategies are incredibly important, not just in the space of learning and education, but also very important in the line of leadership and getting people to respond to certain behaviors or actions. Okay, so these are our objectives. These are incredibly important to you. I'm gonna, put this slide up on on the course landing page. Let me take a screenshot right now, sorry. These are our objectives for today. Objectives are going to be incredibly important to you guys because they are a part of your learning activities. So when you have a set of learning activities, they will be shaped around what the learning objectives are for this lesson. So we're going to go through the first 10 of these objectives today. Do not be intimidated by the number of them, and do not necessarily think of them in isolation. Think of them because these all kind of like speak to each other, okay? So jumping into it. All right, so So the objectives are to 1, define learning, describe elements of classical conditioning, distinguish between the concept of like an unconditioned stimulus and an unconditioned response versus a conditioned stimulus and a conditioned response. Describe the process of establishing a classically conditioned response. Like, what is it that you do in order to create a conditioned response? Providing examples of classical conditioning in humans. Explain the statement, classical conditioning is selective, and illustrated with different types of examples. Contrast, which is tell us the difference between operant conditioning and classical conditioning. Then you're going to be able to describe operant behaviors, look at the law of effect and reinforcement, look at the role of reinforcers in punishment. Remember, I told you the concept of operant conditioning has a lot to do with how we design our punishment and reward systems. We're going to explain the role of shaping and establishing operantly conditioned responses. There's somebody whose mic is on, and there's somebody quite audible in your background. All right, we are going to explain the circumstances under which punishment can be effective and what those drawbacks are, and explain what is meant by helplessness. Okay, so learning for us is the process. Well, again, these are the outcomes. A part of it is directly reflected in this lecture today. Some concepts of these are reflected in the chapter that you should have already read last. Okay, now I have to see who this is. Joshua, is it you? Okay, I'm just gonna mute. Okay. So learning is a process by which experience or practice results in a relatively permanent change in behavior or potential behavior. And that's a really important concept. And I want you to understand the relationship between that definition and how we function in this class in particular. Because, for example, in this class, my expectation is that you guys learn, which is, remember, a process by which experience or practice results in a relatively permanent change in behavior or potential behavior, which means if you have only managed to store information for a short period of time and you cannot apply that, you have actually not learned, okay? So the goal is, in the concept of learning, there should be some relatively permanent change in either the behavior or knowledge and knowledge access and retrieval in those spaces. That is what learning is. Anything that is temporary, anything that is just based on storage and recall that cannot be behaviorally applied, where change cannot be either qualitatively or quantitatively defined or witnessed, did learning even occur? Okay, so there's several concepts in learning that we have to look at. We call these enduring issues. And a part of it is like looking at the comparison or the contrast between like stability versus change. So like to what extent do we change over the course of our lifetime? So stability means like something remains the same. Obviously change means what its level of adaptation over time. Diversity versus universality. All right, so diversity reflects the way that learning events shape our learning and the way that happens amongst individuals. So diversity reflects on the range of impact versus universality, where there is some modicum of anticipated change. I guess this is a good way to reflect this is in a reading lesson. The way that we all interpret something, it may be more reflective of our diversity, whereas there's more universality in a concept like math, like where the operations are just going to be pretty much uniform. Looking at the concept of nature versus nurture and those influences. So learning is influenced by not just like what is in our head. So looking at like what your development is, what has been your actual intellectual capacity and those assets compared to the level of exposure that you may have had or the quality of education that you may have had. Those are two different concepts that impact these outcomes. And then looking at like the mind versus the body, looking at how learning can affect your physical health by influencing how your body responds to a disease. So concepts of like the novelty of being in a space. I know in cold countries, there's something that's called SAD, and it's seasonal. I can't remember what the A is, but seasonal something depression. And a part of it has a lot to do with like what your environment turns into. Sometimes there are places where people are stuck inside and literally your physical location and your concept of things like freedom, or for example, a really good example, I guess an active example would be things like the way that we have all physiologically started responding to things like lockdowns, the way that we have conceptually identified what our freedoms should be and how it made us feel on the inside when those freedoms were taken away. So these are concepts that exist within the learning sphere. Okay, so we're going to talk about classical conditioning, but I'm going to start us off with a bit of a video, because classical conditioning, I think it's one of those things that's like swimming. It is definitely better understood if you see it happening or if you understand it as a full concept, as opposed to reading about it or just hearing about it in pieces. So this video on classical conditioning.
Classical conditioning is a way of learning where a stimulus that triggers a biological response is paired with a new stimulus that then results in the same reaction. The most famous work in classical conditioning was done by Ivan Pavlov in the 1890s. During this time, Pavlov did a lot of research around the digestive processes of dogs. One day during his research, Pavlov noticed that the dogs began to salivate in the presence of the technician who normally fed them. He wondered if the technician was a trigger that stimulated a response associated with food. To find out, he constructed an experiment that would allow him to measure a dog's output of saliva. First, he served the dog food. Then, he served food while playing the sounds of a metronome and repeated the process a few times. Finally, he removed the food and only played the metronome. The dogs began to salivate in response to the metronome alone. Pavlov concluded that if a new stimulus was present when the dog was given food, then that stimulus became associated with food and caused salivation on its own. When he published his findings, Pavlov called the food an unconditioned stimulus because its effects on the dog were not learned. Instead, they triggered an unconditioned response that happened naturally and completely out of the dog's control. The metronome is at first a neutral stimulus. Through the process of repetitive pairing with food, the dog learns to connect the two. This means that the neutral stimulus becomes the conditioned stimulus, and the response to that, a conditioned response. He also reported that 1. Learning occurred most rapidly when the interval between the sound and the appearance of the food was short. 2. The saliva produced by the sound differed in composition from that produced by the food, which means that the conditioned response was not an exact replica of the unconditioned response. 3. While there are several forms of conditioning, such as forward and backward conditioning, classical conditioning cannot create new behavior or be used for training, but instead triggers involuntary biological responses. 4. We can almost entirely undo the conditioning. This happens through extinction, when we repeatedly present the conditioned stimulus in the absence of the unconditioned stimulus. So, what occurs inside the brain? When a dog sees the food, the signals from the eyes and nose stimulate the brain, which activates the salivation glands to secrete saliva to aid the dog with the digestion. When a dog hears a sound, the ears send a signal to the brain, which takes note but has no reason to activate anything. When the two different neurological processes are being activated simultaneously, new synaptic connections occur between the auditory stimulus and the behavioral response. Over time, these synapses are strengthened so that it only takes the sound to activate the pathway leading to salivation. You can try this popular classroom exercise. Take a friend, sit down and relax for 2 minutes. Then allow your partner to check and record your pulse rate. Your partner will then tap a pencil on the desk 5 times. Right after, stand up and hop on one leg for 30 seconds, and then check your pulse again. Repeat the procedure 4 times, having the partner record all data. After relaxing for the 5th time, your partner will tap the pencil 5 times as usual. Now, instead of getting up for your exercise, only check your pulse. If the conditioning was successful, your pulse rate will rise even without engaging in exercise. What do you think? Does classical conditioning always work? If so, are commercials a form of mental manipulation? And should we limit advertising in public spaces?
Okay, so the Pavlovian example is a pretty basic one. Sorry, let me reduce my screen size. It's a pretty standard one. I was when I was reading or preparing for this lesson, I started thinking about the impact of notices for a national address. I thought that was like a really, really good example. So at the beginning of our lockdowns, or somewhere in the middle, yes. So the beginning of our lockdowns for COVID-19, at some point, we would get a notice that the prime minister would give some sort of national address, some sort of update. Great. So we'd become accustomed to having national updates on like what was happening. Then there was a point of time where those addresses were only associated with new and increased lockdown measures. So during a window of time, every time we got a notice that there was going to be a national address, there was an associated increased lockdown measure. So at some point, once you saw that there was going to be a national address, we automatically started associating, like there just became like panics. There was like anxiety. People started shopping because they automatically associated the national address with increased lockdown measures. And that's a form of classical conditioning. So originally, the notices of a national address became an unconditioned response. I mean, sorry, an unconditioned stimulus. And the way people responded to it was like, we knew you had to tune in. That is a completely unconditioned response. There was just a thing that was happening, and we were just naturally responding to it. So over time, as the conditioned response, the frequency of the conditioned response became national address, bad news, national address, bad news, national address, bad news, we automatically started responding to the indication, which is now of the national address, which has now become the condition response with the concept of bad news, and started responding accordingly, regardless of what the national address actually said. So that's a really, really good and active concept of classical conditioning that we would have experienced recently in our times. Can you guys think of any other examples of classical conditionings that may have classical conditioning that may have happened during this time? Everybody's just stone silent today.
An example could be when you like back then before the pandemic, you could have just leave the house. But now, like before you leave the house, you have to make sure you wear your mask. And like now, before we leave anytime, we ensure that we have our masks. So like now we're like conditioned to having that on us.
That's a really good one, because yeah, I can recall at the very beginning of the lockdowns, you would get up or you'd leave your car and you'd forget your mask. And so now that we've been conditioned, like, oh, and another good example of that is too, like grocery store bags. You got up and like you just go to the grocery store, you expect it to have bags. So you get there and you just carry on about your business. But then over time, you realize like, I need this thing. And your behavior was then conditioned to do something else. Tennille?
I was gonna say an example is like having, I saw on social medias, people saying they still, even though curfew was extended, they're still in the house by 9 o'clock. So they were conditioned to minutes having us in the house by 9.
That's another great one. I know I too am a victim of 9 o'clock. Yes, we've been so accustomed to being home by 9 o'clock. There are very seldom when we find people still out after the extended hours, because yes, we have been conditioned to be inside at a particular time. Alicia?
Hi. Okay, I'm a little bit confused. I understand what you're talking about now with the classical condition. I think the mask one was a really good example, but the unconditioned response and unconditioned stimuli, can you explain that a little bit more, please?
So concept, and again, these are just like, these are terms that just refer to like the behaviors that were happening before. What was just happening in life and what were you doing as a result of it? Nobody did anything to manipulate it. It's just how you behaved, right? So the conditioned response is like when you meet that with something that's intentional. So when you, let's say you have the behavior of, give me a behavior, give me something that you do regularly.
Sleep.
Ah, man, you gotta give me some. Okay.
Okay, eat, shop.
Okay, let's shop. Shopping is a really good one. Okay, so let's say you shop because, no, perfect example. And this is something that often happens. You check your email every time you get notifications, right? So you get a notification for an email, boom, you go and check your email. So you check your email during a specific time of day. That is an unconditioned, the email being, checking your email or getting emails is an unconditioned stimulus. You check your emails because your emails are going to be there. The response is, the stimulus is getting the email, checking the email is the response. This is just something that you do out of habit, right? So you get emails from Shein, Fashion Nova. I think this is where young people shop. You get, every time you check your email from Shein or Fashion Nova, there is a sale. You like the discounts and you prefer to shop a sale. So every time you get an email from them, you go to the website. Every time they send you a sale email, you go to the website. So the conditioned response becomes, every time you get an email from them, you go to the website. And that's a part of like a marketing strategy. They send you that email because they know when they send you an email or when they send you a notification on your phone, you're very likely to go to the website. So here is how that can be elaborated. They know you go to the website. If they offer you discounts, when you go to the website, it increases your chances of purchasing. So they took you from, they know you're going to check your phone, they know you're going to go ahead and check your email. That's an unconditioned response. That's an unconditioned stimulus. Boom. They can condition you into shopping on their website by A, sending you those emails, and B, sending you those, offering you discounts when you do go to the website. Do you see how that works? That's conditioning. They know every single time. Like if you check your emails on Thursdays you often get emails. There's psychology behind people knowing the best time to send you emails or the best day out of the week to send you emails. So you will often find that like sales drop on a Thursday because I think there's some psychology behind people preparing for the weekend, making plans, it being like the highest day for opening emails. I don't know what that's about, but mark my words, check your emails on Thursday. If you subscribe to anything, it's usually the day that you're going to get an email, and that triggers the chain reaction. That's conditioning. They've done that very intentionally. It is not by happenstance. Does that make sense?
So the unconditioned response would be something that you naturally respond to.
Something that you, yes, naturally respond to. Something
And
regularly
the condition.
Go on.
Okay, and the condition, sorry. And conditioned response is not natural.
It is designed intentionally to get you to respond in a specific way.
Like because you're associated with it. Yes. That's a great way to say it. Yes.
Yeah. It's literally, it's a form of, it's literally a manipulated response. So that's what classical conditioning is. It is a manipulated response. The same way like advertisers, they know if they put a certain thing, certain times of day, if they put a certain thing, I'm trying to think about an ad that comes on very specific time of day. They know that like if they show breakfast foods first thing in the morning, you're gonna get up, you are gonna eat. But if they start showing Burger King breakfast ads at like 7 to 9 a.m., you're going to start associating the concept of eating breakfast with Burger King. And the conditioned response now becomes breakfast is Burger King. That's a conditioned response. You have no idea it's happening to you, but like marketing uses these strategies very specifically to shape your behavior. I know I've seen it with like, go on.
So anything manipulated or altered is the conditioned response or
The
stimulus. And
yes.
anything natural is the unconditioned. Okay, thank you.
Right. And and it's easy to confuse the stimulus from the response. Just remember the stimulus is the thing that occurs, and the response is how you behave to it. So it's the action, and then there's your actual behavior. So that's the difference between the response and the stimulus. Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so that makes like this part a lot easier. So this is what we are talking about. So the terms are unconditioned stimulus and unconditioned response versus the conditioned stimulus and the conditioned response. So this is what we talked about. In order to establish a conditioned response, what you do is associate both several times. In the example in the video, tap 5 times, you get up and you started jumping, like you do jumping jacks or something like that. So somebody you take your pulse rate, they tap 3 times, you start doing jumping jacks, boom. Tap 3 times, you start doing jumping jacks. After you've done that a couple of times, the same physiological response that you have to the jumping jacks, your body will end up having because of the tapping, because your body now associates the concept of the tapping with the jumping jacks by like skipping it all together. And so it's so funny because you're actually able to shape your own behaviors by doing these sorts of things. I know like I am very hostile when it comes to like using alarms. I don't know what my original association was. I think somebody disturbing my sleep. So now hearing an alarm automatically makes me upset. But like you can shape these things into very positive strategies for yourself. So you can literally condition yourself to doing certain things, much like I hope to condition you guys to arrive at class on time. Okay, again, this is a really good example. So classical conditioning in humans, looking at things like when you are watching a movie, you listen to the score, the soundtrack in a movie or a show is incredibly important. Things you don't even actively think about are incredibly important. You're watching a movie and the sound effects go to kind of like, or there's like creak, creak, creak. Like your brain knows to expect something bad because in your years of watching TV, you know these sounds are associated with these actions. If again, Austin, are you talking? Yeah, the same thing.
I can play like I hear you.
20.
You were saying. Sorry, say it again. You were muffled for me.
No, sorry, my mic's not going on. Sorry.
Okay, no problem. Yeah, the same thing with like an action movie. Think Fast and the Furious. I think that might have been a franchise that everybody's seen. Every time there's a car chase scene, the tempo of the music goes up. Because again, you can anticipate these things based on the soundtrack that's associated with it. All right. So these are things that make you appreciate the value of like movie editing, because if there were a car chase scene, but the tempo of the music that's associated with it goes down, you would be very confused. I know like when I was growing up watching television, you could almost predict who the villain was or who the heroine was, heroine was in a show, because the protagonist, the hero, they would always be the most beautiful person in the show. And the villain always had a very specific sinister look. And so they would use these concepts and kind of like play on that so that like when you saw a show, you almost automatically knew who to trust and who not to trust just based on how people look. I realized like in television, they don't do that as much anymore, where it's like you don't know who the protagonist is automatically just based on like being a classically pretty person. But these are just like examples of how you can use this conditioning in life. Alicia?
So that kind of made me wonder. So stereotyping, would that be an example of classical? Is that it? Yeah, classical. You know, the CR one. Yes.
Yeah. Sometimes stereotyping is a little tricky because it is long-term. It is long-term conditioning. So that's not just classical conditioning. That's a part of like social conditioning. You have been taught to think you have been taught to have like degrees of social expectations based on what is socially approved. And again, these are ways that like you have absolutely, and I feel I often find myself being really empathetic, sympathetic to this generation, because I realize you guys have been conditioned in a way that we weren't. So having being socially conditioned into thinking that certain actions are normal just because it's what you constantly see. Like somebody does a thing, they get the approval. They do a thing, they get their approval. Like that. So that's actually going to go a little more deeply into operant conditioning. But yeah, there's a degree of social conditioning that's involved in here. So for example, your parents, if every time you ask to go outside or ask your parents to do a thing, if they said no, over time, you will stop asking, because what's the answer going to be?
No.
No. Or if we condition children to think like, and we do this a lot, if a boy starts crying and we hush him up, over time, he starts to think that he's not allowed to cry. And so sometimes when we look at our behavior in society, and you start to like unpack why you do a thing or why you think a thing, there's a lot of conditioning that's associated with it. I know a few years back, I had a conversation with a colleague and we were talking about bathing suits, and my daughter might have been 6 at the time. And I said, my daughter will never wear a 2-piece bathing suit. And she was like, well, why? And I was like, because I think it is very adult. And I said these words, but that's not how I felt inside. I know like when you see girls dress a certain way in our society, people will automatically say things like, she's too grown, or you get judged for certain things. And so over time, I picked up those very same behaviors, not because I actively thought it, but because I'd been socially conditioned to believe a thing that I actually didn't believe in. But after unpacking it, I was like, whose fault is it that I feel this way? And I just unpack my behavior. So I want that to be something that you guys practice yourself. You have a lot of preformed behaviors about, particularly in our country, around the concept of respectability and respectability politics, like what people should and should not do, and the reasons. So concepts behind like whether or not having tattoos is considered professional, or certain hair colors or nail colors, or like what has conditioned you to draw this conclusion. And often it is something that is socialized upon us and not necessarily appropriate. Like I know in our country, people think that like if you're not wearing pantyhose, you're not dressed. What made us think that? Because our temperature is often 80 degrees year round. Why would we think in 80-degree weather wearing pantyhose is a most appropriate form of dress? And the question is like, because we've been conditioned to. So just think about that. Anytime you jump to a conclusion about like behavior or actions or what people wear, I want you to pause and like really visit if that makes sense, or were you just conditioned to think that way? All right. So elaborating on the concept of classical conditioning, it is very much selective, because it's also dependent upon the relationship with the original stimulus, with the unconditioned stimulus. All right. So there are ranges of classical conditioning. Oh, it's another really good example of conditioning, particularly in our society recently, the trigger, the PTSD that may be associated with hurricanes, particularly with people from Grand Bahama and Abaco. Based on an experience that they have had, there is like a lasting trauma of like the physiological effect of something that happened based on what they've experienced. So that's a really good example. So also taste aversion, that's a type of conditioning. You had mashed potatoes before, they did not taste good that one time, and all of a sudden you've decided that you do not like mashed potatoes, or you do not eat mashed potatoes. These are a conditioned response. All right. Or if you've seen something, you saw mashed potatoes made in a really dirty kitchen, your brain has associated that filth with mashed potatoes, and you may not be able to look past it. All right. So now we understand classical conditioning often it involves originally an unconditioned stimulus and an unconditioned response on the part of the individual or animal, and then adding an element of a conditioned stimulus to create a separate response. So a sort of manipulation, if you say. Okay, operant conditioning.
Operant conditioning is based on the idea that we can increase or decrease a certain behavior by adding a consequence. For example, if a dog poops on a carpet, we can either provide reinforcement so the dog does it again, or punishment so the dog stops. Both reinforcement and punishment can either be positive or negative, which means we have 4 possible ways to teach this dog a lesson. We can draw the 4 options in a table. If reinforcement is positive, we add something pleasant, like a cookie, to increase the likelihood of a behavior. If reinforcement is negative, we still want to increase the desired behavior, this time by removing something unpleasant, like the leash. If punishment is positive, we add an unpleasant response to decrease behavior. When punishment is negative, we also want to decrease behavior, now by removing something pleasant, like the comfy carpet. If we stop any sort of manipulation, the conditioned behavior will eventually disappear again. This is called extinction. Operant conditioning was first studied by Edward L. Thorndike and later made famous by the work of B.F. Skinner. Skinner believed that organisms are doing what they do naturally until they accidentally encounter a stimulus that creates conditioning, which results in a change in behavior. To test this, he placed a rat inside an operant conditioning chamber, which later became known as the Skinner box. Among other things, inside the box was a lever that would release food when pressed. Conditioning happens in a 3-term contingency, today known as the ABCs of behavior. A stands for antecedent. The rat accidentally hits the lever that triggers the release of food. B stands for behavior and refers to the response. The rat keeps pressing the lever. C stands for consequence. Food keeps coming out. The strength of the response to the conditioning depends on the schedule of reinforcement. If there is always food after pressing, the rat behaves predictably. If the food is released randomly, the rat behaves erratically like an addict. Skinner, born in 1904, was a professor of psychology and subscribed to behaviorism. He argued that you can only study behavior that is visible, and anything happening only within the mind is either a misconception or irrelevant to science. He thought free will was an illusion because behavior is either random or a reaction to the environment. His work became the foundation for behavioral therapy, military drills, and animal training. You can try this classroom exercise on positive reinforcement. One individual must exit the room. Now decide on a task which that individual will complete, such as finding a particular book. Then choose a nonverbal way of reinforcing that task, such as clapping your hands. Invite the person to come back into the room and let them try and complete the task, but don't give any instructions. Every time they are on the right track in regards to completing the task, clap your hands louder. If they move away from performing the task, reduce your applause or stop it entirely. Once the person understands what they are supposed to do, let them explain the task. Did they get it right?
Okay, so I've been working on, simplified language to be able to distinguish between classical conditioning and operant conditioning. That's what I'm trying to. And the best way to think about them differently is classical conditioning is behavior is designed to create a manipulated response to something different. Whereas operant conditioning looks more like strategic behavior. All right. So it's almost like a behavior modification over time. Whereas like classical conditioning it's more associated with, it has more to do with associating two concepts. You associate opening your email with a sale. That's classical conditioning. You associate certain behaviors with what is right. That's conditioning. Operant conditioning is, what are the actions that are involved, or how to build upon actions, behaviors, that's more different. And so that's why I wanted you to understand, like, operant conditioning is often behind punishment and reward systems conceptually. But this is where we also go very, very wrong when we design operant conditionings, because it's a much more, behavior involves more layers than we often take into account when we are creating our systems of rewards and punishment, which is why when these strategies are employed, they're not always effective because other things are overlooked. Perfect example. Prison system. People say we try to associate with like bad behavior with going to jail. And so we want people to be conditioned. We want people to be conditioned away from bad behavior. Like we've already established, like moral compass is not going to be it. So they've created another punishment associated with bad behavior, which is going to jail. What impact? So if that worked effectively, what are some other factors that exist that may render this ineffective, may render the bad behavior, go to jail concept ineffective as an operant condition?
You can explain that one more time, please? Like the question.
Why would we have a behavior and we have the outcome, right? You're supposed to think this behavior leads to this, this behavior leads to this. And originally the concept of the deterrent of bad behavior is you behave badly, you go to jail. You behave badly, you go to jail. And so now in the back of our heads, we shape our behavior because we do not want to go to jail. What's something that can make that operant conditioning not effective?
Like if they, oh, sorry.
No, you could go.
Maybe like I know in some countries they have prisons almost like hotels and like suites and stuff. So like they can do everything that they can do on the outside in the prison systems.
The downside with that, well, the trick to that argument is those countries often have less prisoners than other countries that have more punitive penal systems. So I don't think that's quite it. I think like the Netherlands has that, and at some point they had like 8 people in jail.
Yeah, you're right, Ms. B. And I saw a documentary about that too. Those people tend to have less people in jail.
Right. Whereas like our jails have been overcrowded for at least the last 30 years. So let me give you an example. We tried to create the operant conditioning that if you behave badly, you will go to jail. But the problem is, like our court system, when do you go to court? Maybe like there may be a delay in, like you get bail and you still have the freedom, or there's not enough evidence for you to go to jail. So after doing bad things and not going to jail happens so many times, you realize that jail is not actually a threat. And so you can just go ahead and do bad things. You think that's a fair example?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So jail, it doesn't work. Or the way that we've been talking about, and I'm not a fan of capital punishment myself, but like the threat of being killed by the state doesn't exist. So that's not a threat to people. We also don't take into consideration that like jail life is not necessarily worse for some people. So that's also not a threat. So if you live in a set of circumstances that you have limited freedom, you have limited access to meals, and that sort of thing. The concept of going to jail is not a legitimate threat to you because this is not necessarily different from the life you already live. That's not an effective conditioning in order to deter certain behaviors, which is why that's not a good punishment system. These are things that we don't think about. The same concept may exist for beating. Hitting a child because they've done a thing does not necessarily have the long-term response that we think. There are multiple things that can be associated with hitting. So if a child gets hit a lot at home and then goes into another space and they've gotten hit so much that it's like neutralized to them, it doesn't work as a punishment because they are no longer threatened by the concept of being hit. This is not working. So there will be some kids who will be threatened by the concept of being hit, and there are kids who are immune to it. So that's not necessarily a good one. Alicia.
I actually saw this in real life. Like my little brother, for example, his punishments used to be more psychological, where, okay, they take away things from him or like something weird, right? Versus getting like beaten, because it never used to deter him from doing wrong. But for me, the threat of getting beaten used to deter me from doing wrong. So it's actually interesting seeing that live example.
No, like I promise you, to this day, I cannot write in cursive because when I was in the 3rd grade, my teacher would walk through the class to see if our penmanship was perfect. If it was not perfect, she would hit you with a stick and rip out the page and make you start over. To this day, I shake. And I guess this is more of a classical conditioning concept, but to this day, I shake when I am writing in cursive because that threat of having that page ripped out and being hit still looms within me. And I try to write better because she conditioned it. And that is absolutely terrible because now I have like handwriting PTSD and nobody asked for that. But yes, this is what happens. So you have like the reinforcement of either good behavior. You have either the reinforcement or you have the punishment. And in our, there's a lot of study now, like when we look at schools and learning, we're looking at a lot more studies that lean toward reinforcing good behavior as opposed to punishing bad behavior. And again, social media and games are a really good example of this. So they have immediate reward systems that make people live in these spaces. You post something on social media and you get likes. Excuse me. So the concept of getting likes conditions you into doing certain behaviors. I know I've seen increasing numbers of couples who prank each other because they realize things like pranking someone gets more likes or more views. And so they are now doing very unhealthy behaviors, exchanging very unhealthy behaviors with each other because they realize that it gets a positive response. Any thoughts on that?
Isn't that like how in certain TV shows they would kind of broadcast a certain part of a scene where it's like a bunch of drama going on, and then like when you go and watch the episode, it's like, oh, that's such a disappointment. Like they totally took it out complex.
Clickbait. Yes, that is precisely what that has become by reinforcing, but also again, on the other level, it's also shaping socially what we have become to think is acceptable behavior. We now see people fighting in public and throwing water and drinks in people's faces, wearing uncomfortable clothes that make absolutely no sense because in our head, we've been conditioned to think like, this is what gets attention, this is what gets likes, and they make no sense in real life. Alicia?
I just have, sorry, this unrelated slightly. So the operant conditioning could be, let's say even the dean's list at COB, right? where we're trying to earn that reward. So we're conditioned, I guess, to get good grades to go on that list and be recognized.
Grades in general are a concept of operant conditioning, because you do the thing well, you get a good grade. But there's a downside to this operant conditioning. It's when, and this is my concern in learning environments. This is my issue with school in general. Sometimes schools teach and measure skills that are very specific to school. And people who are good at those things that happen in school are rewarded for it. The downside to an operant conditioning in an environment is that, like, what if the thing that you are good at is never rewarded? Like, what is the outcome of something like that? And that's why I was like, these are layered concepts and we don't think about them holistically when they are delivered. You're actually really good at something, and in the real world, you can actually make money from it, but it's not something that's measured in school. And by the time you graduate from school, you literally feel like you have no value, because the things that are valued in school, you never had as your own individual assets. That's another downside of like very strategic operant conditioning. Isn't that crazy? Adria?
I have a question. Like, would you consider, like, when you were talking about the social media and the reward system that goes with that, do you think the downside of it is like people that might be suffering from like body dysmorphia and stuff? Like, do you think that's
Absolutely. Like, so many levels of insanity. I've seen people with perfectly okay bodies, like just fine, like you fit into clothes nicely, you look good, think that they need to look like something different because the bodies and images that they see on in social media and on television look a certain way and get such a response that they feel less about themselves because they are not validated in the same way. And I'm like, this is insane, because like a part of me is like, this goes out to the entire BBL community, because I'm like, do you know how crazy you look as a 60-year-old with a big butt? Like, that's insane. Like, why do you want that for yourself? How long do you think, quote unquote, being sexy isn't style? Because after a certain age, you look crazy. Do you really want to be somebody's big booty grandma? No, please stop. That's not normal. But because for a certain time frame, people are now being conditioned to do a thing, they're not even looking beyond, like they can't see the forest for the trees. I see that a lot. And like I mentioned clothes. I've seen people wear clothes that they literally cannot wear. The clothing only looks good. Clothing and shoes, they only function for photos. But when they walk, they look crazy, or they can't walk in them, or the clothes ride, or it has like so many holes and cutouts that you cannot function without exposing yourself. But when they post a photo, it gets an approval in a media world. So they are literally doing things that are not functional in real life for an external approval, because operant conditioning, they have been rewarded with the idea of something. This is also the instance with like gambling. There's an immediate reward. So you'll find like a lot of these games and things like spinning that people do, you can win small rewards all over the place. And that conditions you into thinking that you should continue to invest, but you continue to lose. So you'll play a couple of times. This is why in casinos, they say the house always wins. They'll condition you a couple of times, like you win, like you play a couple of times, you win $2 here, $5 there. They get you hooked because you're like, I'm gonna win at some point. And people, this is how addiction is formed. You keep doing this thing because you're hoping to seek this outcome, and sometimes it doesn't come, and they can't undo it. Isn't that wild? Yeah, and this is literally how life is functioning. And that's why I want you to like think about these concepts and think about like how many of the behaviors that you have been shaped by either classical conditioning or operant conditioning. How many things it is that you are doing that don't necessarily make sense, but you've either been punished or rewarded by it so many times that you think that it's completely normative. I want you to actively think about these concepts, okay? Because these are used in real life. Okay, so going back to the slide. So operant conditioning, behaviors that are emitted in the presence of a specific stimuli to earn rewards or punishment. And this is what I mentioned, schools are now going, like I know, I wanted to get kids really, really hyped for a particular lesson. So every time they got a right answer, I gave them things like stickers. But I also lowered the bar so that everybody, this is the basis behind the argument of everybody getting like the attendance award, or schools ensuring that every child gets some type of award, because you don't want people to feel like they didn't earn a thing. You don't want them to exit an environment where they feel unworthy because they didn't earn it. So I think that's the argument that's behind like the attendance award, the good citizenship award. You want to be able to recognize everybody for the assets that they bring. I don't know if we're using it well, but that's a concept. So the elements of the go on.
You believe that should be the case for sports too?
I think it should be the case for activities, because like I said, schools are very contained spaces, right? So let's say you are athletic, but the sport that you play isn't recognized in school, or the school doesn't do it. How is your value recognized? Or there's a good chance that you leave school feeling just completely unworthy. If your parents can't pay for you to do the thing that you do best, you literally leave school feeling unworthy. So I think there's a case to be made. But also I feel like we should have a discussion about constantly putting value to people or making people feel worthy or unworthy. There's a case to be made between like just doing things. I believe in being, for example, curious. I believe in learning to know more. We've been so conditioned to having our learning associated with a grade. There are people who literally will not learn unless they get a grade for it. Isn't that fair? In our culture, exercise does not exist. We don't just, do we exercise for exercising's sake? No, we exercise because like it's a sport. You are rewarded or you are recognized with it. So again, there's a downside. Sports should be associated with just healthy behavior, not everybody being good at it, not everybody going to, the major leagues or the NBA or the NFL. Sports is a part of just like healthy behaviors. But because we've associated reasons with why we do it, people don't do it because they won't achieve those reasons. Is that what we want?
I could kind of disagree. Can I disagree?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
I feel like for me, when I exercise, I'm exercising for a reason, which is the reward of a flat belly, because my daughter just made my belly bigger. So isn't that still for a reason or for a reward?
Yes and no. So that is a reason for you, right? But here's the thing. Sometimes the reward of doing something is less visible than a flat belly. Sometimes it's lowering your blood pressure, living longer, increasing your lung capacity. These are things that are equally as valuable, if not more valuable, but they are not validated. So exercising to lower your blood pressure is preferably over taking medication to lower your blood pressure. But nobody's doing it for that because we've only been taught or conditioned to think exercise is associated with some sort of physiological effect that other people can recognize. You should be exercising for you. See what I'm saying?
Yeah, I totally understand now. So in that way, it's still an operant conditioning since
Correct.
I'm doing it for this flatter stomach.
Correct. Right.
Okay.
And it makes sense. And I'm not saying that's necessary. And this isn't a case of like whether that's good or that's bad. I want you to think about like what are we not considering, or what are we taking for granted by using this very specific strategy to do a thing? Because here's the other side of it. What is the physiological effect? Like, what is the effect on you when you are doing something for a reason and you don't achieve it? So you're exercising every single day, 5 times a week, an hour and a half, and your belly is getting no flatter. What's the effect?
They still feel discouraged.
You will get this, you will stop exercising, but it doesn't stop making exercising good for your body. So you have to think about like, what is the effect that's happening from the strategy that you are using for it? We should just be exercising because it's good for our bodies. We shouldn't just be, and the same concept goes for dieting. We shouldn't just be eating healthy because we want to lose weight. We should be eating healthy because we want to treat our bodies well. The end. See what I'm saying about conditioning? This is just what we've been taught to believe, so we don't do it. All right. All right. So again, I want you to be able to close your eyes. Even if you cannot put all of these things in academic terms, I want you to be able to close your eyes and imagine these processes happening. And that's going to help you to be able to articulate it, even if you can just do it on your own terms, in your own language. If you can explain that in your own language, that is a win. You don't necessarily need to be able to explain it in academic language. All right. The goal is for you to be able to explain this in your own language. All right. So we're looking again in operant condition response, and with the animals, there was a box. So you use a thing, you in the case with BF Skinner, box, mouse, press button, gets food, press button, gets food. And so there's a positive association with pressing this button and getting the food, because you are rewarded or you are punished by that. Same occurs with like training the dog. Your dog pees on the rug, you hit the dog with the newspaper. Eventually the dog associates peeing on the rug with getting hit with the newspaper, and the behavior is discouraged. And again, this works better when the entire structure is in place. This works better when we are only talking about like one set of associated behaviors, and we can actually control that behavior, because we talked about like what happens when there are other variables in place that makes this ineffective, and that can essentially happen. Okay. We talked about positive reinforcers, which are just which we consider rewards, and negative reinforcers are things that we associate with punishment. So positive events whose presence increases the likelihood of behavior. And this is how we talked about like you can end up inadvertently turning a negative reinforcer, so turning a punishment into a reward. You did a bad thing, you didn't go to jail. You did a bad thing, you didn't go to jail. You have now reinforced bad behavior because they did a bad thing, like you robbed, you didn't work, you robbed somebody, you got the money, you never went to jail. You robbed somebody, you got the money. In time, you will begin to associate it like robbing somebody with success. Why would you stop? You keep getting all the good things. Why would you stop doing it? So you see how our system can sometimes condition people into bad behaviors because what they intended to do as a sort of negative reinforcer was ineffective at all. All right. We talked about punishments. Okay, so learned helplessness. And learned helplessness is essentially the failure to take steps to avoid or escape from an unpleasant or aversive stimulus. I like to think of this as, let me see, being around negative people, right? Or somebody that makes you feel bad. They make you feel bad and you don't walk away from it at all. Or having somebody talk badly to you, and you feel bad all the time and you never remove yourself from the situation. Eventually you become neutralized to that. For example, I now know people, there are people who experience like they don't enjoy stability because they've been exposed to so much chaos over the time. They think chaos is a baseline. So if there's no drama in their lives, they think life is boring because they've only been exposed to chaos. Is that a concept you guys can relate to? What are you cooking? That smells so good. Anybody can? Okay. So yeah. So that's a degree of learned helplessness. Not removing yourself from a situation for so long creates a concept of like normalcy about it, and you accept it as if it is a baseline, and it creates a baseline of normalcy for you without you even realizing it. Like a really crazy example of that is like when my daughter was a baby, in order to go to sleep, she would pinch my underarm area. After a while, I stopped stopping her. And now she does it to this day, and she pinches it, and I just take that L. That's an example of learned helplessness. All right. Okay. So I wanted to introduce you guys again, slow introduction this time to your learning activity. I need to give me a second. I still have the assignment in here. New share. New share, right here. I'm gonna put, nope, that's not it. New share. There we go. So this is your, I remember I told you guys last class that I would create the template for your learning activities. So this is your learning activity. Every week, minimally, you will have a learning activity. And again, a part of it is just so that you have an opportunity to practice demonstrating your knowledge so that it is not just all completely retained and you're not just relying on your memory to recall. All right, sorry, shareable document, or did I ever post that? Yes. Or use that link. So every single class, every single week you will have an assignment like this where you will be placed in a group in order to complete an activity. I know how people feel about group activities. I empathize with you. But again, it's a really good opportunity for us to share in our knowledge together and share with each other and work collaboratively. All right. So this one, these are worth two points. I know 2 points sounds super, super low, but this course I think is graded out of 15, I think 250 points altogether. I could be completely wrong about that, but I think it's graded out of 250 points collectively. These bonus points are what will make up your makeup grade. So if you miss an assignment, this is your opportunity. You're doing your bonus assignments ahead of time to be able to make up those grades. Unless you have a very specific excuse absent, and I give you another assignment to complete in lieu of the one that you were supposed to do in class, this is how you get to make up grades. So you don't do as well on a quiz, these are the points that go toward you being able to pull up those grades. You don't do too well on an assignment, and in the case of some of you, you don't submit an assignment at all. This is how you make up those grades. Because if you just didn't turn something in, we're not doing like, oh, it's going to be late, I'm going to turn it in again. You just don't do it. So you need to rack up as many bonus points to protect yourselves as possible. And so this is what it looks like. Like I said, I'm going to share this with you guys. I realized I didn't make this a Google document yet. So for in-class learning activities, you'll be assigned to a team and you're going to create learning materials for this class. The reason I have you creating learning materials is I want you to be able to engage in this way. And I want you to make resources for not only yourselves, but for your classmates. By being able to create them, you will demonstrate your own understanding. Plus, you will be creating a resource for you to be able to study from, you and your classmates to be able to study from. Each group, I'd like to use 4. So you're still going to be dealing with like approximately 5 to 6 people on your team. You're either going to make an infographic, you're going to make a KWL chart. I have templates or examples in there. You're going to make a lesson study quiz. For the quiz, you can use either Google form and make like a multiple, these can always just be multiple choice. You don't have to do short answers, just make a multiple choice quiz for class, or you can make a class notes wiki. And a wiki is just a really fancy, I'm sorry about my background. It's very loud. You can make a class wiki, and a wiki is essentially like your summarized notes of what's occurred for each of the objectives. That's what those are. Again, we're just creating learning materials for everybody to be able to use and share from and to reinforce your learning. So you will be graded on the following, and each of these is worth, I think, 1/4 point. Yeah, each of these is worth 1/4 point so that your answer comes out to 2 points. So if you are excellent, you get 1/4 point, and then it just gets reduced from there. So you will be graded based on this. It's as simple as this. Each learning objective is reflected. For this, one of the reasons this lesson is split up is to reflect those 10 objectives. 2, the content is reflected in content reflecting each objective is clearly labeled. So if you have a question, you should have something next to it that says objective 1, objective 2, objective 3, like that. The assignment is clear and easy to understand. Like, we should be able to look at it and actually use it with some level of functionality. And then the resource is helpful and supports overall learning goals. That's it. That's what you're going to be graded on. Nothing harsher than that. Any questions? Tyler, you are killing me. Can you give me some water, please? Oh gosh. Sorry, I mentioned that I hurt my back earlier. And taking a deep breath really does hurt. I do not have COVID. I wrenched my back picking up a very, very heavy toddler. Ow, that hurts. Okay, so let me share this assignment right now. Any questions about that? I'm exporting.
No, ma'am.
Okay, so I'm gonna put you in breakout groups right now.
Yeah, can you explain it again, please?
Sorry, okay. Give me 1 second to just export it first. So every class, every week, minimally, you will be creating one of these things that's reflected on the course lecture for this week. Does that make sense? So for today, you're going to be working on operant conditioning and classical conditioning. Those are what your outcomes are going to be based on. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to be starting this today. I mean, class only has like what, 20 minutes left. So we're going to be starting this today. And we're going to wrap this up at the beginning of next class. So you'll have about 20 minutes, well, just under 20 minutes to start it now, and then we'll continue it during next class. And so let's say the first hour of next class, I will allow you to, let's say 45 minutes. I will allow you to continue to work on this in your group. Okay. I guess that means I need to figure out who your group members are. Okay, so for this first assignment, I actually want you to create your own teams while I upload the document. So let me know who's on your team. Your team should have like 4 to 5 people, and I will assign you in your teams based on that. I don't know if putting you in the group that you were in before is super helpful, which is why I'm gonna let you pick your own team. All right, give me a second to upload this document. Oh no, sorry, wrong thing. I'm in class. Shh. You guys are creating your teams? Because I just know like there's somebody who dropped the ball on their team during the last activity, and I don't want to. I don't want to force you to work with that person again. All right, boom. I have uploaded the documents. I am now sharing. Get link. I am sharing this. Anyone with link? You are a viewer, copy link. All right, so we could just spend some time looking at the activities and just kind of like processing them and discussing them right now. Go to my chat. This class does not have a WhatsApp group because no. I mean, y'all can have it. I don't want it. We can I guess we can create a group in Teams if everybody has that app. I want nothing to do with the WhatsApp group. I keep my WhatsApp group muted. That's my level of interaction with that. Okay. Do we have Teams now? Let me know if you have trouble opening up the documents while I upload it to its respective place. Anybody? For next class, you will have the added, sorry, I'm gonna stop sharing. For next class, you will have the added measure of, I will go ahead and upload the class slides for this week. So you will have, since I've modified them sufficiently, I will upload those. So you will have the added recording of this class by the time we get back on Wednesday. You will have the slide shares. You would have seen the assignments and you would already have your team together. So do we have, you don't have a team. We have one. I'll send the link. Nobody is talking to me. I'm talking to myself right now. I'm trying not to just. Y'all really have me talking to myself right now like a crazy person. All right, random teams. It's looking like right now. Oh, you're working on. All right, that's all you had to say. Okay, cool. I will continue uploading the resources on the class slide while you guys work on it. Desktop. That's this. This boy is trying to kill me. If I don't make it to next class, y'all know what happened. Sharing. Copy link. Oh, I also needed to hyperlink the activity, the outcomes for the week. All right, boom. Make a copy. Make a copy? What? Make a copy with full record slides. Okay. I want to be able to put team one. Do we have 2, 3, team 4? Okay. Who am I putting in team one?
Is it the order?
I'm just putting names here so that we have some sort of structure.
Okay, you can put Alicia Smith.
Wait, you're breaking up. Say that one more time.
Alicia Smith.
One more time.
I'll type it.
Okay. Oh, thank you. Yeah, that made sense, didn't it? Thank you. So yes, everybody do that. Type. So Alicia, Joshua, and Shania, have you guys made a team? Because if we have 3 people without a team, y'all sound like a team. Y'all sound like the beginning of a team to me.
You can hear me?
I can hear you now.
Okay, we have in our team we have Alicia.
I mean,
Okay.
I see Alicia, Adria, Regina, Monet.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, I'm not sharing screen. I'm sorry. I was trying to see my desktop at the same time. So yeah, I have that one. I don't want to share my screen because I want to be able to see my full desktop. I want to see the Zoom meeting and my desktop. So I have that now. Monet is spelled wrong. Okay, Monaye. Monaye. Anybody else for a team? Just type it in the chat. I'll put it on the slide. So when I post the slide to the group. All right. Crystal, Tennille, Asher, Darren, Alicia, Darren. I think your groups are probably going to need 1 to 2 more people. Each of your groups. Because there are 21 of you. And there are 4 groups. So one group will have to have 6. Diorca, Dejorica. Am I saying your name right?
It's Sharika, the D is silent.
Right, Jerica. I thought so. That's why I was so confused just now. Jerica. Because I know the D is supposed to be silent. Okay, so Jerica and Daranika, y'all are the beginning of a team.
Yes.
Jerica, Daranika. Okay.
Can I join that team as well, Shania?
And I think I saw, I will take you. Anicia. Anicia is also on the team. Because Daranika said we'll take you.
Shania is joining too, right?
Yeah. So I have Jarika, Daranika, Shania, and Anicia. Anyone need someone? Tamar and Akeem, are y'all the beginning of a team? Okay, wait, hold on. Destiny, you belong with Adria, those. Okay. Destiny. Okay. I think team 1, I'm gonna go ahead and say y'all are closed. Okay, so Akeem, You are the beginning of a team. That's Akeem. Who else was out here looking for a group? Was that Tamar I saw?
Yeah.
Okay, Tamar. Akeem, Tamar. Daria. Sasha. Okay, so each one of these, everybody else, I don't want to just put people on a team at this point. So team 2, you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Team 2, you need 1 to 2 people. Team 3, hold on, wait. Denisha, Joshua, who is this? Azari and Steve. Did y'all just make up like another team? I ain't like this. Y'all trying to confuse me. Yeah, because y'all made yourselves into a team, but all the teams are there are teams. This team has to unteam itself. It's like if we distribute y'all. Unless Akeem, Tamar, Daria, and Sasha wants to be dismantled. And I can just place y'all with other people, or y'all can offer yourselves to another team. Please tell me what to do, y'all. Are you trying to burn the house down? Hello, what are we doing, people? Okay, I'm going to disband this group. Akeem, you now live with team 2. Since I put you guys together. Tamar, you now belong to team 3. Daria and Sasha, you can live with team Denisha et al. Right. Who is team 2? I'm going to share it in a second. I needed to be able to see my comments while I type. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. No, this team got 7. So Sasha, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5, 10, 15, 20. Oh, it's 22 of you. Sorry. So really arbitrarily, the last 2 teams have 6 people. All right, sharing my screen again. Where's the slide? Here you go. These are your teams. Can everybody see this? Oh, good grief. Sorry, right there. Did I get it right? Please clarify now.
Yes, team 1 is correct.
It's correct? Okay. Does anybody have an issue with their placement? I mean, okay, good. So these are teams for next class. I will place you in these groups. I'm going to go ahead and post the materials in the course landing page, which is still available to you guys on Moodle. It's in Moodle. Please don't ask me where it is again. There's a link to it in Moodle and you should be able to access it. Any questions?
See my name.
You don't see your name. Sorry, I can't see who you are. Who are you?
Austin.
1, 5. Is anybody here twice? Or is my math not mathing? 5, that's only 20. 22. I thought this class had 22 people in it. Austin, where do you belong? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12 plus 10 is 22. I guess there's 23 of you. Austin, where do you belong?
I don't know.
Where would you like to go? Because if you don't know, I don't know how I'm supposed to know.
Anywhere.
It's a very passive aggressive response. You know where you want to be. Say it with your chest.
No, I serious. I actually. No.
Okay, well, any, mini, miny, mo, and find a team. I don't want to make this decision because I don't want anybody saying anything to me about their teammates. I don't want that responsibility.
Yes,
Me.
team.
Which one?
Team 2, I guess.
Team 2. Sounds great. Okay. Okay. Our teams have been formed. Your slide should be up in a few. So this slide will be there. You have your class activity. Please, ahead of class, go ahead and explore all of the examples or templates. I will tell, so I'm gonna tell you right now what your team's gonna do. Just because I have it in this order. Team 1 is going to be, you're gonna be in this order. Team 1, infographic. Team 2, KWL chart. Team 3, lesson study quiz. And team 4 is the class wiki. That's what you'll be doing. Any questions, comments, concerns? We'll do this at the top of next class. I want to be able to jump right into it. Going once. Going twice. Gone. Okay, I will see you guys next class. Check the class landing page for all of your associated resources. All right. See you on Wednesday.